Rachel sits motionless in her therapist's waiting room, staring at the landscape painting on the wall. Her outward appearance looked put together. Perfectly styled hair, designer blazer, manicured nails, all suggesting someone who has it all under control. But inside, she's drowning. In fact, last night, she found herself sobbing in her car outside the grocery store, just overwhelmed by memories she tried so hard to forget. Rachel, the therapist calls her name, and she quickly wipes away a tear. She's good at that, hiding the pain, keeping up with appearances. That's what everyone expects from a successful marketing executive. The supportive wife, the friend who always has it under control. Maybe you know that feeling. Those emotional wounds that affect everything, like deep down. It affects your relationships, your health, your view of yourself, even though no one can see them. But what if there is more to life than carrying this weight of emotional wounds? What if the very pain you've been trying to hide could become the doorway to the healing experience you've been waiting for? If you were to walk into any bookstore today, you'd find entire sections dedicated to emotional healing and emotional intelligence. It's become one of the fastest growing topics in personal development, and for good reason. Our culture is finally beginning to recognize what faith has long understood, that emotional health is just as crucial as physical health. We're living in an age where conversations about emotional well-being are moving from the therapist's office to our dinner tables. Companies are training leaders in emotional intelligence. Schools are incorporating emotional awareness into their curriculum. Even social media, which often showcases only our best side, is seeing a shift to a more authentic sharing about our emotional struggles. And yet, despite this growing openness, many of us still carry emotional wounds we've never fully addressed. What makes emotional wounds particularly challenging is their unique ability to affect every aspect of our lives. Maybe it's past experiences that impact how you parent your own children, or perhaps it's words spoken years ago that still influence your career choices today. Or maybe it's a betrayal that makes it very, very difficult for you to trust in relationships today. The pressure to have it all together remains strong. I mean, we live in a culture that often prioritizes keeping up appearances over emotional honesty. While we might share our successes freely, our deeper emotional struggles often go unspoken and unhealed. Many people have spent years, sometimes decades, carrying these emotional burdens, and they never ever felt safe to tell anybody about them. In the Bible, we find a story that mirrors these complex emotional struggles in surprising ways. It's the story of Hannah, a woman who lived over 3,000 years ago, and yet her emotional journey feels remarkably current. We meet her in the first chapter of 1 Samuel, where she's described as a woman with a bitter soul. Despite having a husband who loved her deeply, she carried emotional wounds that affected every aspect of her life. What's fascinating about Hannah's story is that it doesn't just describe emotional pain, it offers a pathway toward healing. While her specific circumstances might be different from ours, her journey from emotional woundness to wholeness provides timeless wisdom for our own healing journeys. What if the very emotions you've been trying to suppress aren't meant to be hidden but healed? What if your journey through emotional pain isn't just about personal healing, but could become a source of hope for others? Today, we'll explore how to begin that journey of emotional healing, drawing wisdom from Hannah's remarkable story and discovering that it points us to an even greater source of healing. And so whether you're dealing with fresh wounds or scars that have been there for decades, whether you're the one who was hurt or you were the one who caused the pain, there's hope for healing. And it starts with understanding that there's more to life than carrying the weight of emotional wounds. Have you ever noticed that some wounds are easier to talk about than others? If someone breaks their arm, for example, they get a cast that everyone can sign. When someone has a surgery, we bring them meals. But emotional wounds, those often go unnoticed and untreated. Before we dive into Hannah's story, let me give you a little bit of context. We find Hannah's story during the period of the judges in Israel, around 1100 BC. She was one of two wives of a man named Elkanah. While his other wife, Peninnah, had children, Hannah remained childless. But Hannah's story serves more than just historical context. It's a journey of emotional healing that speaks directly to our modern struggles with emotional wounds. Her experience reveals three transformative truths about emotional healing. The first truth is that emotional pain is a very real thing. When we meet Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 1, the Bible tells us in verse 6, "So Peninnah would taunt Hannah and make fun of her because the Lord had kept her from having children." 1 Samuel 1 verse 6. The Hebrew word used here for make fun of means to thunder against, to rage, to irritate. Now this wasn't just like casual teasing. This was very intentional, emotional abuse. Hannah lived in a culture where a woman's worth was often measured by her ability to have children. But it wasn't just cultural pressure she faced. She endured daily verbal and emotional abuse from Peninnah, her husband's other wife. I can imagine each family gathering, each religious festival became an opportunity for Peninnah to remind Hannah of her inadequacy that caused deep emotional pain. Verse 7 tells us something profound about the impact of emotional wounds. It says, "Year after year it was the same. Peninnah would taunt Hannah as they went to the tabernacle. Each time, Hannah would be reduced to tears and would not even eat." Notice the physical manifestation of emotional pain: loss of appetite, tears, physical pain. This is what unhealed emotional wounds do. They don't just affect our emotions, they impact our whole being. Hannah's experience shows us that emotional pain isn't just, it's just all in your head, as some people say. No, it affects our bodies, it affects our relationships, it affects everything. But here's where Hannah's story takes a remarkable turn. In verse 9, we're told that one day, Hannah got up. Three simple words that carry profound meaning. After years of torment, after another meal spent in tears, Hannah got up. Sometimes the first step in emotional healing is simply getting up, choosing to not stay in the place of pain. She goes to the temple, and verse 10 tells us Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. 1 Samuel 1 verse 10. The Hebrew word for bitterly here is marah. It's the same word used to describe the bitter waters the Israelites couldn't drink in the wilderness. But just as God transformed those bitter waters into sweet water, He was about to transform Hannah's bitterness into blessing. What's interesting about Hannah's prayer is its raw honesty. She doesn't pretend to be fine. She doesn't spiritualize her pain. She pours out her heart so authentically that Eli, the priest, mistakes her for being drunk. You know, it's remarkable that the Bible includes such honest expressions of emotional pain. Hannah's story gives us permission to be real about our hurt. Some of us, both men and women, have been taught that Being strong means always being positive, always looking like you have it together. But the reality is that these things don't always bring healing. Acknowledging that emotional pain is real and that you're struggling is the first step towards healing. The second truth about emotional healing from Hannah's experience is that healing often begins before circumstances change. What do I mean by that? Well, Hannah's first moment of healing comes before she receives what she's praying for, a baby. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 18, after pouring out her heart to God, we read, "Then she went back and began to eat again, and she was no longer sad." Think about that. Nothing in her external experiences had changed. She still didn't have a child. Penina was still in her life. The cultural shame hadn't lifted, but something profound had shifted internally. So much so that she began to eat something. Her face changed. Before this, the text tells us she would weep and couldn't even eat. This wasn't denial or fake positivity. This was a genuine transformation that happened before her circumstances changed. Author and theologian Walter Brueggemann notes that Hannah's transformation suggests that peace comes not from changed circumstances, but from being heard and known by God. Many of us are waiting for our external changes to change before we'll allow ourselves to heal. We say to ourselves, I'll feel better when they apologize. I'll find peace once justice is served. I'll be whole when my situation improves. But Hannah shows us a different path. She found peace, and it wasn't in her changed circumstances, but in being heard and known by God. This challenges our modern mindset of needing everything fixed before we can be okay. The third truth about emotional healing is that emotional healing requires some level of surrender. In Hannah's prayer, she makes a vow to God. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 11, she prays, "O Lord of heaven's armies, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime." This wasn't just any vow. In that culture, having a son meant security, meant status, meant identity. Hannah was essentially saying, God, if you give me what I'm longing for, I'll give it back to you. She's surrendering not just her pain, but her deepest desire. She's loosening her grip on the very thing whose absence caused her so much pain. Some of us are holding our emotional wounds like some sort of prized possession. Maybe it's because they've become part of our identity. Maybe it's because they give us a sense of control. Maybe they justify our anger or bitterness. But Hannah shows us that healing often requires surrender, letting go of our timeline, our way of fixing things, our right to revenge, our need to even understand why. Look at the progression. First, she pours out her pain honestly, without holding back. Then she experiences inner healing before her circumstances changed. Finally, she surrenders her deepest desire to God. This isn't just a story about getting what she wanted. It's about transformation through surrender. What have you been holding on to that you need to surrender? What emotional scars would you like to let go of starting today? You may be asking, well, I think I'm okay. What if I don't struggle with emotional hurt? Well, one resource I've found that could offer some clarity is Mike Foster's 7 Primal Questions. In his book, he offers a framework that identifies 7 core questions humans unconsciously seek to answer throughout their entire lives. These primal questions are rooted in early childhood experiences and shape our sense of identity, relationships, and behaviors. Foster argues that these questions influence our internal narratives, affecting how we act in relationships. The 7 primal questions are: am I safe? Am I secure? Am I loved? Am I wanted? Am I successful? Am I good enough? And do I have purpose? In a future episode, I will go through these in greater detail, but Foster suggests that everyone has a dominant question from this list that we just read that we subconsciously carry with us for the rest of our lives, and we're always looking for a yes response to that question. These questions become lenses through which people perceive the world. When answered positively, everything's great, we're thriving. If we get a no or a maybe, however, to our question, we go in what he calls the scramble. That's when we resort to negative and destructive patterns of behavior because we're afraid and we want to force a yes response. At its core, the 7 primal questions is about self-awareness, which can be the start to emotional healing. Just by knowing your question, you can begin to experience greater understanding and peace about why you act a certain way and the things that trigger you. Something I've noticed when I read Hannah's story is that there are many parallels between her and Jesus. For example, just as Hannah poured out her soul before God, Jesus invites us to bring our emotional wounds to Him. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, He says, "Then Jesus said, 'Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest.'" Jesus isn't just talking about physical rest here. It's also emotional rest for our wounds. In addition, Hannah's willingness to give her son back to God foreshadows an even greater gift, God giving His own Son for our healing. Isaiah chapter 53 verse 4 tells us that He bore our griefs and carried our sorrows. The word for griefs was literally emotional sickness. Jesus didn't just come to heal physical sickness, He came to heal emotional wounds. Even in the Garden of Gethsemane, before He was crucified, Jesus demonstrated the kind of emotional honesty we see in Hannah. He was deeply troubled and distressed, it says in Mark chapter 14, verse 33. He experienced betrayal. He experienced abandonment. He experienced rejection. When He prayed with loud cries and tears, it says, He was showing us that emotional pain isn't just some sort of weakness or failure. It's part of the human experience. Something else that's interesting about this story is Hannah's healing didn't just impact her life. Through her healed heart came Samuel, who would become one of Israel's greatest prophets. He would anoint both Saul and David as kings, shaping the future of an entire nation. Similarly, when Jesus heals our emotional wounds, it's not just for our benefit. As we read last time in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4, He comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. Think about that. Your healed wounds could become channels of healing for others. The very pain that once threatened to break you could become the story that helps someone else experience a breakthrough. Sometimes our deepest hurts become our greatest opportunities to help others. You know, Hannah couldn't have known her story would be encouraging people thousands of years after her life. She was just trying to survive her emotional pain. But God, He had a bigger plan. In the same way, your current emotional struggles might be preparing you for something you can't see just yet. Your story of healing might become someone else's incredible source of hope.
Have you ever asked these questions? Why am I here? Is there a God? Why is there so much evil and suffering? And why are there so many different religions, and which one is true? Is the Bible fact or fiction? Who is Jesus of Nazareth? Was He truly God, as Christians say He is? And why did Jesus come to earth to die? And how does His death offer us salvation? What happens when I die? Is there really a heaven or hell? These questions and others we answer on our online Bible study platform at hopestudy.ca. There, you will find answers to these and other life-changing questions. If you have any questions, please email us at hopestudy@hopetv.ca. God bless you. See you there.
Looking at Hannah's story, here are just 3 reflective questions to help you process your own journey towards emotional healing. Number 1, what emotional wounds are you carrying right now? This is a challenging question that requires a lot of honest self-reflection. Like Hannah in the temple, you might just need to pour out what you've been bottling up inside. So take a moment to think about these things. Number 1, what emotions surface when you're alone in your thoughts? How long have you been carrying this pain? In what ways has this emotional wound affected other areas of your life? Are there specific triggers or situations that bring these feelings to the surface? You can even head over to primalquestion.com to take the Primal Question Assessment by Mike Foster and find out if you have one of those primal questions that you haven't been aware of. Sometimes we've carried pain for so long it seems normal. But like Hannah's story shows us, acknowledgement is the first step towards healing. You don't need to have all the answers, but by just naming your pain, it's crucial for beginning the healing process. The second reflective question is, where do you need to create safe space for honest expression? Remember how Hannah went to the temple to pour out her heart? Consider, what safe spaces do you have where you can express your emotions? What keeps you from being honest about them? Have you considered prayer as a way to help you express those feelings to God? You might not be ready to completely be vulnerable yet, and that's okay. Like Hannah, who found a private place to pray. Focus on creating safe spaces where you can begin to express your emotions honestly. And finally, number 3, what do you need to surrender in order to heal? Hannah's healing journey included surrendering her deepest desire to God. And so reflect on, what are you holding on to that might be blocking your healing? How might God be inviting you to trust Him with your pain? What would it look like to find peace before your circumstances are changed? And how can your healed wound become hope for someone else? Remember, surrender isn't about denying the pain or pretending that everything's fine. It's about choosing to trust God with our deepest hurts and allowing Him to bring healing in His way and in His time. This week, I encourage you to really think about these questions and write down your responses. Share with one trusted person what you've been carrying. Take one step toward professional help if you need it. Create daily quiet moments for emotional honesty with God. Begin practicing surrender in just small ways at first. If these questions bring up deep emotions or memories, that's normal and it's expected. Consider this as a sacred invitation to begin your healing journey. You might want to look into professional counseling. There's incredible strength in recognizing when we need expert help. It's important to remember that healing is a process. It's not an event. Like Hannah's story, transformation often happens gradually. It happens one step at a time. The good news is that God promises us in Psalms chapter 147, verse 3, He heals the brokenhearted and bandages their wounds. Just as Hannah found healing through honest prayer and surrender, you too can find healing for your emotional wounds. Your story isn't over yet, and your healing journey might become the very thing that helps someone else find hope. The journey of emotional healing isn't meant to be walked alone. Hannah had, remember, both Eli the priest and her husband Elkanah supporting her. Jesus Himself often ministered to people in community, and that's why connecting with others who understand your journey is so important. And so whether through a trusted friend, a support group, or a counselor, surrounding yourself with support can make the difference between staying stuck and moving forward. And so I'd like to invite you to connect with me on this journey. Follow More to Life on social media, where you can message me directly. And whether you're just beginning to acknowledge your emotional wounds, or maybe you're ready to take some steps towards healing, you don't have to walk this path alone. Remember, the goal isn't to never feel pain. It's to not let pain have the final word in your story. Hannah's tears weren't the end of her story. They were just part of her journey to joy. Your emotional wounds don't disqualify you from God's purposes. They might actually be preparing you for them.
If you haven't already partnered with us as an agent of hope, I want to share with you how you can do so. Above all, we need your prayers. Please remember those who are involved with Hope Channel Canada in the production of its programs, as well as the different initiatives we'll be launching throughout the country. Also, any time that you have to spare in order to volunteer with one of our projects will be greatly appreciated. Lastly, your financial support would be greatly appreciated. And any amount makes a huge difference in impacting Canadians. Thank you once again for joining us on this exciting journey of sharing hope across Canada and beyond.
When I was a kid, one of my favorite places in the world was Canada's Wonderland. Among all the roller coasters and attractions and rides, there was this one ride that captured my attention. It was the antique car ride. I'd sit behind that wheel feeling so grown up, convinced I was the world's greatest driver, and I was only 7 years old. The steering wheel felt real in my hands, and I truly believed I was controlling where the car was going. It wasn't until years later that I discovered the truth, that there was a track underneath the car the whole time. That track was guiding every turn, every movement. All my careful steering, well, it didn't really matter that much because the track underneath the car determined where the car was headed. I remember feeling a bit disappointed at first, realizing all those times I thought I was in control, but in reality, I wasn't. Looking back now, I realize how much this mirrors our journey with emotional healing. Just like that hidden track guiding my car underneath it at Canada's Wonderland, our unaddressed emotional wounds often guide the direction of our lives. They affect our relationships, our decisions, our actions, and even when we think we're the ones in complete control, sometimes something else is actually guiding our lives. Some of us are operating on tracks laid by childhood trauma, others on paths carved by broken relationships or deep disappointments. Like those antique cars, we might think we're freely choosing our directions, unaware of how these emotional wounds are actually guiding every turn. But here's where Hannah's story offers us hope. When she poured out her soul before God, she wasn't just expressing emotion, she was allowing God to lift her car off of its old tracks and place it on a new track. Her healing journey shows us that we don't have to stay on tracks laid by past pain. Through honest prayer, through surrender, she found a new way forward. One not determined by her wounds, but determined by God's healing.